What's up, guys? So the goal for today's episode is to get our quarter panel welded in. Is it going to happen? I don't know. Now obviously, since we last left off, I have accomplished a lot of little tasks. So for starters, all of the mating surfaces for the quarter panel in the car have been prepped and put in weld-through primer. And just as an extra measure, I went ahead and painted the inside of this. I just did a quick coat of Rust-Oleum paint. It's going to be better than, what was there in the factory, so, that's not going to hurt. I did the same thing with these guys here. Now, to fill these holes, I didn't do anything fancy. So I used my new preferred method shown to me by Harvey Redmond, aka Rallycat Garage. And that is just taking a piece of copper, clamping it behind the hole, and these were about nickel-sized holes. And then starting on the outer part of the hole and just attacking it with weld and going in a circular motion and filling it in. The weld won't stick to the copper, you can pop it off, build it up, and then after you have it built up, you can just grind it down. As you can see, we have a nice smooth area to weld to. Now, to me, this method is the most logical, as opposed to basically cutting out nickel-sized pieces of sheet metal and welding them in. Maybe there's a downside to doing it that way that I don't know about, but it seemed to work, and I rather enjoyed it, because it was like sculpting, basically. And for those of you wondering how I solved the issue of the bolt that popped down inside the rocker panel with the clip on it that it threads into. Basically, the bracket was on there, so I used the bracket to pry the bolt and clip out, and then I just hammered the sheet metal back in place, made sure that the bolt and the clip were good to go, ran it through a few cycles through the clip with PB Blaster, got everything good to go, and then I held it in place with the bolt and I tacked it in place so that thing is not coming out. And then for extra precaution, I did the same thing to this clip over here so it doesn't happen on that side. So that brings us to basically fitting the quarter panel on one last time, marking all the areas where we want to have our spot welds, drilling the holes, and going from there. Alright, so that's looking pretty good. We'll check out our gaps with the trunk lid. Hopefully everything's still lining up well there, which it seems to be. That all looks good. It looks a little high in here, but I'm not going to lose sleep over that. Also, I did lower the door down because I mentioned in the last episode that needed to happen, and I haven't had the quarter panel on since I did that. So let's just see how it lines up now. Which it lines up okay, but now things are definitely tighter and my lines here don't line up. So I knew that was going to happen to a degree. Got some thinking to do here. Yeah, I was afraid this might happen, and sure enough it did. And the door is where it needs to be. If you look at that bottom gap, that is really well spaced. And the gapping up here, which I discussed in the last episode, that is much more on point with where it's supposed to be. This might not be the best idea. What I think I might try, because I have a little bit more space to work with down here, is I might try angling the door up just a little bit to bring this a little closer, move this a little further away, and that would also help line up these gaps a little bit better. This is still really close, so just not sure how I feel about all this. This is really hard for me to look at, especially after Robert Adams, aka the Infernal Craftsman on YouTube, who was currently working on the same phase of his Mustang project, sent me a picture showing me just how awesome his lines lined up. And as you can see, he is all but TKO'd me on that matchup, so good for you, buddy. I'm happy for you. Alright, here's what I'm going to do. I have a little bit of wiggle room as far as where this door lines up. I can move this just a little bit forward to help deal with that really close spacing back there. And as much as I love how even that bottom gap is, I'm going to try angling the door up just a little bit to help make up for some of that distance, to help make up for that alignment issue. And if I can get it pretty close, I'm going to call it, because I really don't want to cut off the bottom of that quarter panel and try to lower it. Alright, so I'm not sure how I did it by moving it around, but I essentially have the situation remedied, and the gap on the bottom is still pretty consistent. So at this point, it's time to take the quarter back off, and I'm going to drill all my holes for the spot welds. I'll put it back on, and then mark those holes, spot weld areas, onto the weld through primer on the car, take it back off, and then bare those areas. So we have nice clean metal we are welding to, because I cannot stand trying to weld through that weld through primer. It can't be done with the zinc stuff. It can be done, but it's going to make a total mess. It's really hard to get a good connection through that weld through primer, and it just, bad things happen. Alright guys, as you can see, she's back on. All of my spot weld holes have been drilled. And I did do the responsible thing, and rather than trying to drill straight through with the 5/16, I went around with a smaller bit and put a little indent, and then came back and drilled them all out. So everything went well. I have all of the holes marked on the primer now. So all that's really left to do is take this thing off, bare those marks in the primer, and weld this thing in. The only concern I have really is right in there, things get a little tight, but this is up against the B-pillar. So if I do any adjusting in here, it's gonna have to be shaving this door a little bit, I would guess. Now, one thing I did do is I went around and clamped everything and put in additional sheet metal screws. These will go back in, and I'm gonna leave these in while I'm welding. And they will not come out until everything's welded, because what I'm finding is if I clamp, like let's say this area of the quarter panel down first, before I clamp this section down, things move. So there is now a certain order in which I have to put these screws in that I know, and I will do that so that everything lines up, and then I will come back and weld all of this in. You can see the gapping in along here turned out really well. It's either right up against the metal or there's just a little bit of gapping. This area right here will be easy enough to push down with the hammer while I weld that in place, and the gaps are good. So I'm going to pop this bad boy off one last time, bare the primer in the spot weld areas. It'll go back on and we'll weld it in. I'm not going to bother filming stripping the primer, so I'll do that part and then I'll fire the camera back up once I'm ready to weld everything in. Well, she's on, hopefully for the last time. I have checked and rechecked and double checked, taken all kinds of measurements now that she's in her final spot, and I think we are ready to weld her in. Let's get her done. Alright, so I would say our first weld went off without a hitch. I'm going to check it. Yep, she burned through the other side. We're good. So if we can keep that pace up, we will be alright. Looks good. Now I am going to hop around a little bit to distribute the heat. So we'll do one up here. Looks good. Alright, so now I'm going to try butt welding this section right here, which is going to be a little harder because it's not, you know, spot weld. You're dealing with a couple layers. So I'm going to have to be quicker. I'm not going to change my settings. I'm just going to try to be a little quicker. That's my plan of attack. Well, we made it. Alright, things are definitely moving along. I'm nowhere near being done, but the butt weld is coming along nicely here along the sail panel, and things are lining up good along here. My spot welds in here are going in nicely, nice and flat for the most part, not too many issues. Everything seems to be going good. I did run into a few issues along here in the wheelhouse, which I expected this might happen because I really have to up in here. Well, you see there's a really good weld, a nice flat weld. But in some of these places the metal needs to be dollied together a little bit, and if it's not close enough, it is having a hard time making contact, and the end of the welder kind of spits and sputters, and at that point I just need to stop and walk away and practice my patience. That door needs adjusted out just a teeny bit, but we are doing all right. Now, unfortunately, I've got to call it for this episode, but at least you guys got to see some quarter panel weldage going on. So technically it's welded in, but it's not completely welded in. We're close. we're doing all right, but I'm excited, incredibly happy. Confident in my welding skills. Things are going good enough that, you know, I'm not frustrated. I know when I need to back off, take my time, which is what I'm going to do now. Walk away, cut this episode, and we will pick up in the next episode. So until then, guys, stay driven.